Well, I have to say, as a general theme, the biggest out-of-the-box change initiative we've had has been getting our team to place a greater emphasis on outcomes over process. And that may not sound significant to some organizations, but because Port Authority is a large public legacy organization with a lot of history and tradition, history and tradition are important and we should be proud of it, but too often when I started here, I'd ask why we did certain things or focused on certain things, and all too often the answer was because we've always been successful doing it that way. So we weren't particularly cognizant of changing market conditions or the real needs and wants of a changing customer base. Probably the most visible manifestation of that change has been the overall redesign of our transit services throughout our system. And that's been recognized by many in the public transportation industry as the most comprehensive service redesign of any large transit agency in the country. We took an extensive we undertook an extensive planning effort that wrapped up in 2009. We fully completed the system redesign by 2011, and the overall theme we heard from our customer was, your service is too confusing, it offers too many limited options. We'd rather have fewer choices but better options. So what we ended up doing through that service redesign was extensive consolidation. We merged 219 bus and rail routes into 102. And that may sound like a massive elimination of service, but in truth, the average route in our system now has 60% more service than it did before the change. So that means service is more frequent, it runs earlier in the morning, it runs later in the evening, and is more likely to run on weekends. And those were all attributes that our customers asked for. Now, about a year since we've completed that process, we've seen a 50% increase in our riders per service hour, which is how we measure productivity. And we've seen some of our routes actually double their ridership in that period of time. Well, there have clearly been tangible payoffs for the authority, but I also want to touch on the intangible payoffs that we've seen. First of all, I mentioned the overall improvement in our service productivity, and that, of course, translates directly to our bottom line. About a year ago, a local policy research institute known as the Allegheny Institute examined the comparative efficiency of large transit agencies. And they were examining national data for the 20 largest agencies in the nation. And they found that over a 4-year period, Port Authority's cost per passenger trip increased by 3%, while the other 19 agencies saw an average increase of 17%, and no other agency's increase in the cost per ride was as low as the Port Authority's. So in a very challenging global fiscal environment, those results simply allow us to focus more of our resources directly on the services that carry passengers. Now, of course, for us to focus on outcomes extends to all aspects of our business practices, not just the design of our services. So as a result, over the last 5 years, we've become a significantly leaner organization than we used to be, and the percentage of our budget that we put toward administration and overhead has gone down each year for those 5 years. And looking at those same national data sets that I mentioned, where we were in the top half of the highest administrative loads among our peer systems about 5 years ago, we rank now at 4th lowest among 24 similar organizations. So those are all tangible, quantifiable business results. They put money on the bottom line. They allow us to put more money into our services for our customers. But as far as intangibles, I'd have to say the impact's been even bigger. To be successful, organizations like ours have to rely on broad community support. And frankly, 5 years ago, that support was very hard to come by. An awful lot of people in our community, including elected officials, the business community, and many of the media outlets, viewed us as a bloated bureaucracy that paid little attention to the changing nature of the region or to our own long-term financial sustainability. We've expended a great deal of effort over the last 5 years to build relationships with many of our harshest critics to try to understand their concerns. Where we agreed with them, we talked about the steps we were taking to make change, and we continually reported back. Where we didn't agree, we told them that too, and we told them why. So as a result, now, some of our biggest critics historically have become some of our most enthusiastic supporters. Well, the biggest challenge we've had in any of the change initiatives is overcoming inertia. Port Authority had been successful for many, many years doing things in a certain way, and many of us knew that the external environment that was changing rapidly meant we couldn't stay the same. But when you're dealing with an organization of 3,000 employees, 120,000 daily customers, and an awful lot of outside stakeholders who rely on the system and its predictability, sometimes it's really hard to convince people of that. So I think in many ways, the transformation that the Pittsburgh region has seen over the past 30 years also made the changes we undertook more difficult. I think some would argue that Pittsburgh has seen more changes as a region in that time than any other city in the nation. And overall, it successfully converted its economy from an old Rust Belt heavy industrial base to one built on high tech and healthcare. So from a regional perspective, that change has been very positive, and it's put the city on firm footing for the future. But for many of the people who still live here, that's been a very difficult transition, and one from which they emerged in worse shape personally. So the result of all this for the Port Authority was an interesting dichotomy. You know, on the one hand, we had a lot of community leadership, particularly in these new and emerging industries, who recognized the need for us to change. On the other, you had a lot of community leadership who saw the hardship that this transformation brought to many sectors of the population, so they were very reluctant to support another round of change. And then the overwhelming question is, well, how do you overcome that? And I'd say there are probably dozens of ways I could answer, and it really depends on the issue. And I may not even know, to be honest with you, some of the reasons, but in our case, we began with a very real advantage. First of all, we started with a very smart, very engaged board of directors who believed in the future of the organization, and they were committed to its mission and success. And don't get me wrong, I had a lot of disagreements with our members along the way, and I had them have many disagreements among themselves over different issues. But in my opinion, that productive conflict actually made us stronger. As we developed richer information, our senior management and I conducted assessments, analyzed alternatives, and we communicated with our board of directors, not to our board of directors. As a result, our board members were much more invested in the initiatives we were undertaking, and they were much more willing to take the criticism that goes along with any change initiative. Eventually, as those changes began to bear fruit, they could take great pride in talking about their accomplishments as a governing body. And of course, any board member gets to be a board or a board member because they're very well accomplished and respected in the community. And because our folks were so invested in what we were doing and why, they also became our most effective communicators of change outside the organization. Their enthusiasm had a snowball effect that cascaded through a number of community sectors, leading to the improved community relationships that we have today.